Hello everyone, this is Nitpicking Nerd and I just watched X-Men Dark Phoenix. And why did I even go and watch this movie? I mean, it was pretty obvious it's going to be bad, but I guess I didn't expect it to be this bad because, I liked all the X-Men movies. Even the bad ones had some entertainment value. They were still fun in a way, even X-Men Origins Wolverine, which was probably the stupidest X-Men movie, but it was still enjoyable, maybe because it was so bad. It's like it's unintentional comedy, like I was laughing from the stupidity of the movie, so it was still entertaining. And so I had some enjoyment from all the X-Men movies, and so I thought it's just another X-Men movie. All of those movies had some good moments, they had some fun moments, the action scene, something good was in it, but in Dark Phoenix, almost nothing. There was one good scene in the beginning, the whole part about them going to space. Also, that final action scene in the end had some cool moments, but other than that, the movie had nothing. It had no story. There was no real story in it. It was pretty terrible. Also, one of the reasons I think I didn't believe it's going to be this bad, even though, even I listened to some of the reviews of people telling me it's bad, and I didn't want to listen. Maybe it's because, YouTube became so oversaturated with negative reviews. Like, people are hating on everything nowadays. Everybody are bashing movies and shows. I kind of got used to it always being negative, and so I don't take it as seriously. And so I thought, like all X-Men movies, this one will have some redeeming qualities. It will have some good moments, some good scenes, something. And yet I can tell you that everything that everyone are saying about this movie is true. It's just absolutely terrible. Apart from a few, very few, like a few minutes, I can say are good in this movie. Like that first action scene of them going into space and then being superheroes they're supposed to be. So finally, this movie is doing, at least in the beginning, it's doing what the X-Men are supposed to be doing. I know it's too bad they didn't use any part of that cartoon music. Like, I always hope that maybe they will have some reference to the X-Men cartoon, because when I was a little kid I grew up on the X-Men cartoon. By the way, the uniforms of the X-Men in this movie, they look a little bit kind of Star Trek-ish, and so I kind of like that, and they're going to space, and it's science fiction and all that stuff. So the beginning of the movie, I did kind of enjoy it in the beginning, even though it was a little bit silly, not that well done, but still that essence of what the X-Men are supposed to be, a team effort of superheroes going into space wearing uniforms. So the beginning of the movie I actually kind of liked, and I thought they will now properly do the Dark Phoenix story the way it was supposed to be, the way it was in the cartoons. I do remember that cartoon, those episodes about that, and so I was kind of nostalgic, and so that's why I did enjoy the beginning. But then the movie totally went off the rails and just became so, it was just boring. It's just a boring movie with no actual story, just nothing. It was just stuff happening and people meeting, all the same characters meeting, and no one is doing anything. There are no stakes. Like, I didn't care about anything. It was just super boring, and I can't believe it that this movie is actually worse than The Last Stand. I remember when The Last Stand came out, I absolutely hated it. I thought it's the worst movie ever. But now compared to this, that one looks okay. That one now looks like at least it had a story. At least it had characters. At least it had some cool action scenes and stuff like that. In that movie, the Dark Phoenix was just a subplot. It was just a small part of a story. It had a bigger story. It had some kind of moral dilemma. It had something. It had some character moments. The movie was pretty bad overall. It had a lot of silly moments which really ruined the movie. It had a lot of silly mutants. But it also had some awesome moments, like Magneto moving the Golden Gate Bridge. Some of the fight scenes were okay, like Bobby versus Spyro was cool, and I liked Juggernaut in that movie, even though I know he wasn't properly done. But at the time, they couldn't do it with CGI, so I can forgive the fact they used the muscle suit and all that stuff. It was still fun seeing Juggernaut in that movie, running through walls, Kitty escaping, so at least it had some fun moments. But in this movie there was almost nothing, except the beginning scene of them going into space, and maybe the final train scene, which had some nice, a few seconds of something cool, like Magneto using a bunch of guns to shoot at the bad guys, stuff like that. But overall, most of the movie was just boring and nothing happening, nothing had any stakes, nothing had any meaning. It had no story at all. At least X-Men Last Stand had the story of the cure and all that stuff, some kind of moral dilemma, something to talk about, something you can discuss and debate, and yet here just nothing. So I will now go into spoilers to discuss the movie. So this is the whole plot of the movie. So Jean Grey suddenly has the Dark Phoenix Force, and it's making her evil, just like in The Last Stand, and she can't control it, which she keeps saying all the time, I can't control it. And then in the end there are some alien bad guys who are totally pathetic villains, by the way, absolutely no development, no personality, nothing. just like evil henchmen for no reason, and they want to steal her powers, and then she defeats them, and then she sacrifices herself and she dies, and that's it. So that's the whole plot summed up like in a sentence, and nothing else was happening. No good dialogue, nothing interesting. They made Xavier a dickhead again, just like he was in The Last Stand. You know how they kind of ruined him because he used to be such a good moral character, and then in X-Men Last Stand, suddenly they decided to give him that darker tone, or that he did something not so moral, which I remember at the time I hated when they did that, but at least it gave something interesting, something complex, added complexity to the character, and he did kind of a necessary evil thing, so at least it added some complexity to his character. And here they go even further. Here they make him kind of a narcissist, so he cares about he's sending the X-Men on dangerous missions because he wants to get a medal from the president and stuff like that, so they show him having that kind of negative side to him, but he explains it by saying that he's only doing that so that humanity will love the mutants, they will look at them as superheroes, which is a neat idea. I found that interesting. Also the fact that apparently they are all public knowledge now, so why are they still hiding their jet plane under the basketball court? If it's all in the open now, if it's public knowledge, then why are they still hiding under the school? So none of that really makes sense. But I kind of liked that idea of them being in the open, being public knowledge. And you know, this is basically a new timeline because it's been retcon, it's been rebooted with time travel, so it's okay to do things differently. It doesn't have to line up exactly to the old movies, and so that's okay. By the way, they also show the president, and I kind of expected, will it be Bill Clinton, because it's supposed to be in the 90s, so shouldn't the president be Bill Clinton? And yet it was some unknown guy. But again, this is all an alternate timeline, so I'm fine with that. So they set up this whole scenario of the X-Men working with the government. Everybody knows who they are, but then the movie kind of forgets about it, and then later in the movie, once again, they round up all the mutants, take them to a prison camp, just like the worst fears of Magneto and all that stuff. So one day he's best buddies with the president personally calls him to ask for help or something, and the next day, they take all the mutants to concentration camps. Like, it was such a drastic, unrealistic, kind of silly transition that is just, I found that almost laughable. Like, he tries to phone the president and the president won't answer him anymore. Why? Just because they fought a few bad mutants on the street? Which is part of their job, isn't it? Like, they've always been doing that, so shouldn't that be, like, okay? Shouldn't that be understandable? So, because the X-Men fought Magneto's team and those aliens on the streets, that's why the government suddenly decided to round up all the mutants, take them all to prison, including Xavier, who they just gave a medal to a day before, and they don't even give him the chance to talk to the president, so really bad writing of the script, and making an Xavier a dick, and that cringy scene of Mystique telling him that he should rename the X-Men into X-Women, and a lot of cringy moments like that. The acting was fine because it still had a bunch of good actors like McAvoy, Fassbender, even Sansa from Game of Thrones was okay. Like, I didn't have a problem with the acting, but the script just didn't give them anything. No good dialogue, no good emotional scene. They tried to do that, like she met her father and stuff, but all of that was kind of pointless. It didn't go anywhere. So I actually think X-Men Last Stand was better done than this. Last Stand didn't focus on that story, it was just a small subplot, and so it wasn't well done, and so I guess they decided to do it properly this time and more closely to the comics. So they go to space and all of that. And by the way, I did like the fact that they did have similarities to The Last Stand because it's still set in the same universe, even though they rebooted the timeline, but it was still in the same universe, and the past is identical in both of them. So that means there should be some similarities. So they did establish in The Last Stand that the Phoenix is just a mutation that Jean has, that she's a super mutant, and that's just her power, and Xavier was limiting her. So they did keep some of those elements in this movie as well, and I did like that because it's supposed to be in the same universe, but then they introduced the Phoenix Force from space and they never properly explained it. Like, didn't she have the Phoenix Force in the previous movie, in X-Men Apocalypse? In the end of that movie, he told her, unleash your power, and then the Phoenix Force emerges and she destroys Apocalypse and all of that. And so that was in line with The Last Stand, that it showed that it was basically her mutant power and that it was suppressed. And in this movie, they do keep those elements of Xavier suppressing her from childhood to help her control these powers, and at the same time it shows as if the Phoenix Force is something that inhabits her, that possesses her while she's in space, and they're totally forgetting that she already had those powers in the end of the previous movie, in the Apocalypse, and I was expecting them to somehow explain it, to say maybe part of that energy already possessed her before, and maybe the Xavier in The Last Stand simply didn't realize that whole alien part of it, maybe he didn't know about it, And so he just thought it's all Jean's mutant power. So he simply didn't know that part of the picture. So maybe this movie will explain it by saying that part of that energy already possessed her, and now all the rest of it wants to come to possess her. And so, but the movie never explained that. So the movie never gave a logical explanation to all these contradictions and continuity problems. And also the ending of the movie doesn't really fit what we saw in the end of Days of Future Past, because remember, Wolverine came back to the future, which was the future of the new timeline which was created with these guys, with the new cast, and so that should still be the future of all of these movies, unless there's another time travel story, which there wasn't yet, and so that means that future should still happen. And in that future, Jean was alive again. So in the end of this movie, Jean dies, and so that doesn't seem to fit. My only excuse for that is that because she didn't really die, she turned into the Phoenix in the end, so that means she might return to a human form later, and that will tie into that ending of Days of Future Past. But it's still a bit annoying, like they didn't, it feels as if they just didn't care about the continuity. So they forgot that she already had the Phoenix Force in the previous movie, then she came back to normal, and only now after she got possessed by the Phoenix Force in space, suddenly she's now having those powers for the first time. And they could have explained that easily with a few lines, maybe by those aliens if they would have explained something about that, but they didn't, and so there was no new information given, and it's just the same old formula again. Just like in The Last Stand, so she's unable to control this power, she's killing people, and then in the end she sacrifices herself. There was even another contradiction with one of those aliens stabbed her in the end, and yet he didn't do anything to her, so she was just managed to heal herself, and so that stab didn't do anything. So doesn't that contradict how Wolverine killed her in The Last Stand, that he was able to stab her? Maybe I could explain that by saying that she wanted to die, she asked him to kill her in that movie, and so maybe she deliberately didn't heal herself from that injury even though she could have. So that's my excuse for that, because in this movie someone else stabbed her through the chest and yet she's able to heal herself as if nothing happened. So it feels a little bit like a contradiction. And also they did have some similarities with the special effects. She's able to vaporize people and all of that. And again, I don't mind that because it's supposed to be in the same universe. So I even kind of appreciated those similarities, and also Xavier's personality, showing his dark side. I was kind of fine with all of that. Also, they inserted the whole plot line about Magneto now having a homeland for the mutants, which was something from the comics, that he was the ruler of a country of mutants. So they showed it in this movie, and yet they never really explained it, they never really explored anything about it, so it was all pointless. They just crammed it in here just to, I guess, throw a bone to the comic fans to show them, here you go, it's what you wanted, here it is, and then not doing anything with that. And also it's kind of a continuity issue also, because in the previous movies, you know, everybody knows that Magneto tried to kill the president. He then killed millions of people in Apocalypse because he used his powers to destroy whole cities, and we saw like thousands of buildings collapsing, so presumably millions of people got killed directly by Magneto, so he's a mass murderer. And yet in this movie they say that the US government gave him that island to form his own nation and all of that, so I'm just thinking, like, why would they not want to take him out for what he did previously? And I guess Xavier erased everybody's memories in the US government because no one seems to care about Magneto anymore. They gave him an island to form his own nation, and the US government is fine with that, so that doesn't really make much sense. And also they sent 2 helicopters to Magneto with metal guns, and they almost confront Magneto. So isn't that kind of laughable? If they know about his powers, why are they sending armed men to confront him? And Magneto was kind of pointless as a character in this movie. Once again, he was just there for the cool factor. So he puts on his helmet again and he looks cool, and he wants to kill Jean because she killed Mystique, and I guess he was in love with Mystique, and he cares so much about it that suddenly he goes right back into the action to try to kill her, even though he knows that she didn't do it deliberately because they had a scene together previously and she talked with him and he saw that she was crying and he saw all of that, and yet still he wants to kill her. So does he still care about Mystique so much that he wants to take revenge at all cost? And remember, even in The Last Stand, which was after she was with him for decades, he still didn't care about her enough. He just left her there when she lost her powers, when she became human. He didn't care about her at all anymore and just left her there naked. And yet in this new timeline, even though she's not with him anymore and she's with Xavier, still he cares about her so much that he's willing to like kill people to take revenge. And even Hank McCoy is also on Magneto's side because he apparently loved Mystique, and because Jean killed Mystique, he wants to kill Jean, even though he's the good guy. He's always been like the nerd of the team and all of that, and suddenly he's like on the Magneto side, and it doesn't make sense either. and they had those other villains who are the aliens, which could have been a neat idea. That was from the comics. There were a bunch of aliens also with powers, and in the X-Men cartoons I remember all those aliens showing up and all that stuff, so that could have been interesting if it was done well, but they were so badly done. They were just there, they're just a bunch of people, and it's casually revealed, oh, they're aliens, and they don't do anything with that. Like, there is no story to it, there's nothing. No personality to those villains, nothing. So it was all just pointless. They could have taken that out of the movie, or made them just mutants, and nothing would change. It was just an excuse to do an action scene. So what else did I miss? No Quicksilver scene. You know, in all these recent prequels of the X-Men, one of the best parts was the character of Quicksilver, and I absolutely loved his powers. I always loved to see him having fun while moving at high speed and all of that. So each of those movies taking place in the past of the X-Men, they always had at least one good Quicksilver scene of him doing something cool and awesome, and we see it from his perspective. And those scenes alone kind of made the whole movie kind of worthwhile, and there was no such scene here. He did use his powers in the beginning, and then he gets injured and he's out of the movie till the very end of the movie. So that was a very big disappointment. I expected to have a Quicksilver scene which is awesome like the other ones, and they didn't deliver on that as well. And you know, that guy deserves his own movie because, you know, he's such a funny character, and also those powers have so much potential to do so many cool and fun stuff with that. I would love to see a whole movie about him and using those powers and all that stuff. And so they couldn't even give us one good scene with him. It's like they don't know what to do with him, they don't know how to write a cool action scene, so they just make up an excuse so that he's not in the movie anymore. And the same with all the characters, they didn't really give anyone anything to do, so they were all just, it was pointless, except that first scene of them doing something as a team effort going into space to save a bunch of astronauts. That's probably the only really good scene in the whole movie. One of the interesting things about the X-Men movies, one of the reasons I really liked all the older X-Men movies, was because they dealt with all kinds of political, sociological, morality questions in this made-up scenario of some humans having powers and some of them not, and that splits all of humanity into two groups, basically, those with powers and those who are normal. And it shows what would happen to society in such a situation, and shows how all the humans hate the mutants and vice versa, and all these tensions between these two groups of humanity, and also on the individual level how that affects people when, you know, the government wants to know all the mutants and their powers. And so it brings up so many questions which can be used as a metaphor to real life issues like racism, bigotry, discrimination, the question of how much power the government should have versus personal freedoms. Like, if the government wants to do it for understandable reasons, it wants to control people for security reasons, for anti-criminal reasons, and so it has some legitimate reasons for all of that, but on the other hand, it's personal freedoms, privacy, and so those two things should be kind of in balance. The X-Men movies had some meaty topics for discussion, like that's topics which we can actually debate, and that's not just in some imaginary scenario, but because it's so similar to real life issues in reality. So all of that is part of the reason it's also interesting. And also, you know, the morality debates between Xavier and Magneto, they have different views. Like, Xavier is like a leftist who wants everybody to coexist in peace, and Magneto is like kind of a fascist extremist who wants the separation of these different people. He thinks his people are superior and should rule over the others, and so they are friends, but they are also enemies ideologically, and so we have these ideological clashes between them. So all of that, we can actually debate about all those topics. You know, oftentimes we can think, okay, Xavier is right in theory, but in practice, because humanity really are becoming like fascistic toward the mutants, they really do round up all the mutants, and so that means Magneto was actually right in wanting to defend the mutants. So he's been very aggressive in his wanting to defend the mutants, so he's not just, you know, black and white villain, he has some good reasons as well. So all of these characters have some complexity. So all of that makes it interesting. And this movie did touch upon, it did have the potential to do something with all of that as well, but it totally missed the mark. So we have that whole setup of the mutants actually helping out humanity. They're being like superheroes, so they're now loved by humanity. But then because a few bad things happen, once again humanity wants to round them all up into concentration camps. And then we have the scene of all of them being on the train, being imprisoned. So wouldn't this have been a nice opportunity to have some dialogue between Magneto and Xavier? Once again, you know, Eric can tell him, you see, Charles, I was right. So it was an opportunity to once again explore some of those ideas, and they didn't. And so that really annoys me, that they totally missed the opportunity to discuss these topics. And so it's just lazy writing. You know, all those scenes between Charles and Magneto in the old movies, they were so awesome. They had like those polite conversations and while playing chess, and the chess kind of symbolizes the way that they both have their own groups, they all have their own army, and they're ideologically opposed to each other. It symbolizes the way they are fighting against each other ideologically with their real soldiers, and so that was really neat, really kind of classic. And they didn't do any of that here, and maybe in the very end of the movie they meet again and they want to play chess again, so that was kind of silly, not really well done. And the whole thing with Charles in the end, he left the X-Men in the end. He kind of retired from being their professor, and he apparently he's going to join Magneto now, so all of that also doesn't really tie with the continuity, because again I say we saw the future in the end of Days of Future Past. We saw that Xavier is still the head of that school and all of that, and yet here apparently he's no longer with them. He now goes off and meets Magneto in the end, and this is supposed to be the final X-Men movie by Fox, so all of these actors, that's their last appearance in these roles. So shouldn't have this movie tied everything perfectly with everything in the right place, and yet they're again doing all these twists. And so Jean Grey died in the end. Xavier is no longer running the school. Apparently he's going to join Magneto, so I guess it leaves room for the imagination. We can imagine how it all came back to how it's supposed to be in all that time in between, but it's still a little bit annoying. If this is the last movie in this series, it should have tied everything together well. Just like, you know, the end of Days of Future Past, that should have been the end, because that was a happy ending and it showed everybody in the right place where they are supposed to be. So that should have been the ending of this franchise by this company with these actors. And yet they screwed it all up once again, and it's all messy once again. So they didn't do any of that in this movie. There was no ideological topic, there was no morality tale, there was no complex question to discuss, nothing to debate about it. I mean, what was the difference ideologically between Xavier and Magneto? I guess the only difference between them was that Xavier still wanted to save Jean, despite her killing people, and Magneto wanted to kill her. That's the only difference between them. It's not really that big of a question, like the fate of one person, what should be done. And they didn't even debate about it, they never talked about it. So there was no bigger overall story. And I'm not saying, you know, every movie has to be about saving all of humanity or all the mutants. I'm not saying every movie should have huge scales, but it should be about something we can talk about, something to discuss. And also the whole idea of the aliens, it was just thrown into this movie and it was never even discussed by anyone. No one even talked about the whole idea of it. Like, no one was amazed by it. I mean, the aliens were always part of the comics and the cartoons, they were always in there, but the movies never had the aliens. It was only about the humans and the mutants. So suddenly they add the aliens into the mix, that's great, but no one is amazed by the very idea of it. I mean, when Xavier finds out about it, he was like, oh, so you're not humans, you're not mutants, you're aliens, oh, okay. And then the movie just goes on like it's all perfectly normal. No one, not even one character is like amazed, oh, there are aliens now? It's totally meaningless, no one cares about that. Oh, so these groups, they are the aliens. Okay, fine, like no one is surprised, no one is amazed. Oh, they are aliens now. Okay, that's it. Like, it was never part of the bigger plot. Like, I expected maybe in the very end of the movie, maybe that would be what brings the mutants and the humans together. If they realize there is a bigger alien threat out there, if there are other groups, maybe that will help them put the differences aside and to work together, humans and mutants. No, none of that is ever discussed. So the school keeps running even though previously the government wanted to put them all in prison. Suddenly it's all okay again. So it's never resolved, that whole situation between humans and mutants. So where does that stand now? And how did it end? So we don't know. And now there are aliens and we don't know what anyone's opinion on that is. Does the government know there are aliens now? We don't know. We don't care. No one cares. So that's just totally pathetic. And in the very end, Xavier apparently goes with Magneto now, and he joins Magneto. Again, that was a missed opportunity. That could have been a cool twist. Show Xavier saying, oh, I was wrong, you were right, to Magneto. The humans will never accept us. I will now join your brotherhood. That could have been a cool twist, because, you know, Xavier could be a great supervillain with his powers. That could have been an interesting idea. Of course, if they actually had some other movie to explore that idea. But apparently, like, it's implied that will be the case, but it's never said directly, and we know that he's supposed to, we saw the future in Days of Future Past, so he's supposed to still be running the school in the end. So another missed opportunity. Again, that's something that maybe in this movie they could have done. Maybe show Xavier really turning to the dark side, becoming a super villain. Maybe later reveal that it's Dark Phoenix controlling him, doing all of that. So you could have done so many things with all of these characters and this whole setup, and they didn't do anything, so it's just pointless. So I'm really disappointed by this movie. A really sad ending to this franchise, which overall was fun, was entertaining, and the first movies were great. The first two movies, Days of Future Past was good, even First Class was good. Logan was a good movie by itself, but I'm not sure, that's also not a good ending for the franchise because it's a bad ending. It's not a happy ending. I think the final scene in the future should have been the one in Days of Future Past, where everything is in its right place, a happy ending, and instead in Logan we basically saw everybody died later and it's a depressing ending. So that's why I'm not sure I kind of like Logan as the ending of this whole story, but it was good as its own movie. So overall, most of this franchise was good, but it had all these terrible movies in between, so it's all a mixed bag, and it's just sad to see something with so much potential being so underused, and to see all these missed opportunities. It's just such a lazy movie production. So that's my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments below and we can discuss it. So I will do another video with my ranking of all the X-Men movies with a quick review of all of them, so that will be in my next video, and I will see you all next time. Bye bye.